Petra, thank you so much for being on the Stepsero podcast. It's a pleasure.
It's so good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
The podcast sits at the intersection of the modern workplace, work culture, leadership, mental well-being. And I know that you have addressed these topics over and over. You consult businesses on these topics. So inevitably, I am very, very curious to have a conversation with you around how you think the modern workplace is evolving. And we are in a post-COVID era now. It's been a while since COVID, but there's a lot of turmoil around society and obviously around the modern workplace. And I would love to hear your take on what does the modern workplace look like these days and how it is changing.
Big question. It's interestingly, we are in turmoil. There is a lot of change going on, but I'm really an optimist, which is interesting given I just did research for my digital well-being book and there's the AI debate and so many people are thinking, the world's going to end and all of these things. But I think things have to get worse before they get better. And so humans are interesting. They have to experience the pain of something so greatly in order to absolutely evolve and create change. I wish it wasn't that way, but for so many, that's the way it is, right? And so we're in this messy middle. And what I mean by that is we should be technically with AI and all these tools and systems more efficient than we've ever been. Our days should be compressed technically, right? The 4-hour work, the 4-day week should have taken off, like a whole sorts of things could have taken off with the tools that we have. But instead, in a capitalist society, we're just doing more and more and more and more. So we have tools, but we're in meetings we don't need to be on. We're not using the efficiencies in the way that hopefully, eventually, they will allow us to be. So I think we're in this messy middle where we're feeling more burnout. Managers, the squeezed middle are stretched. The vision of a company is often unclear, which makes people nervous because they're responding to the economy and all sorts of things and change and restructures. All of this is happening. And we could spend 15 minutes just talking about all the dynamics that are going on, not to mention the geopolitical landscape, right? So workplace is this microcosm within the world, which is stressing people out. And again, with my book in mind, we've got all of that in our pockets. We never used to have every single war and every single crisis that was going on in the world in our pockets, affecting our nervous system every minute of every day. So there's this real shift in which bit is, the cultures that are evolving and need to evolve, leadership, these sorts of pieces. But us as individuals, what's the responsibility we need to take for our own well-being when it comes to tech addiction, when it comes to creating meaning in our lives, when it comes to community and connection? So there's like the systemic challenge, which is huge. And then there's the individual, like what's in my control piece, right? And I'm seeing lots of people just be kind of collude with the problem by going, well, the world's just like it like this. This is the way it is, right? And so I think both need to be addressed. We can't just be pointing fingers and blaming the people up there and the people down there. And so I'm always talking about personal responsibility, what's in your control as ways to get started. But there's a few ideas.
Do you believe people lack agency, and do you think that, I mean, you've explained this perfectly, right? Like we see tons of changes happening around us, and in a way, for some of us, it's easier to look at those events rather than inwards, right? Do you feel that these events specifically and whatever surrounded the modern workplace in the last few years has uncovered an attitude that was there already? As this being accelerated in a way? Are we just different? I'm just curious about why do we tend as people to look outwards rather than inwards? Because clearly there's a lot more we can do as individuals to address certain issues.
So why do we look outward instead of inward? Well, I mean, hey, you know my story. I was raised in a religious cult. So people like giving their agency away if it means that they'll belong. It's that whole tribal primitive thing of like, if I can belong to this tribe, fuck my values. I'm going to stay safe. So safety is and if we think about COVID times versus now, safety suddenly became this really visceral thing, especially in Western countries where perhaps we hadn't had to think about that in the same way as certain other cultures. And so we've gotten into this fight or flight, are we okay feeling, right? And we know from the science that when you're in that survival mode, it's really hard to be a great leader, to make creative decisions, to have agency or see the autonomy that you might have. So we get into it, it's easier to blame and to fight, right? Or to freeze or to avoid. Now, our digital world is giving us the perfect avenue for avoiding feeling anything, right? So anytime there's a little bit of discomfort or something that maybe I need to think about for my body, my health, my mental health, my connection at work, whatever, I can just scroll. I can just shop. I can just distract. And so what we're doing is we're kind of numbing the information that would give us the clues on how to take agency. And so the first step is always how do we detach and reflect and create pockets of time where we can daydream and critically think for ourselves. And daydreaming is like, I just advocate for when you go for a walk to your station or whatever you're doing, just don't listen to a podcast or your headphones. Obviously, listen to this one, but later. But you know what I mean? Like, we need the space to consolidate all the sensory overload that we're experiencing to make sense of it in order to decide what agency we're going to take. If you never have that piece, you're just reacting. Stimulus that is. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and I'm thinking to myself, when did this occur? Like, obviously I see myself in what you're saying, right? Like, I go to the gym, I need to listen to music. I'm on the S-Bahn, on the metro, whatever, and I'm scrolling on my phone. And I know that somehow this contributes to my levels of exhaustion, anxiety, and as a consequence, I show up at work differently, right? Like, this is I think a very common path to many people. Have we seen this coming, or has this suddenly happened, and we
Well,
don't know why?
Well, I think we know why. I mean, there's two things here. One is there's always been groupthink, leaders who step up, toxic leaders, people who prefer to follow than to create choice. There's people who decide on different ways, and that's not making it right or wrong. Some people want to be leaders, they have these innate qualities. Other people are very content to be part of the machine and to move forward in that way. But what's new and different is our lack of connection. So meaningful connection. We're more hyper connected than ever, but we're not feeling the sense of depth of connection. So loneliness statistics are through the roof. We're feeling isolation, which absolutely has an effect on anxiety levels, depression, addiction, a whole host of things, right? And so we're talking about this mental health crisis, but I say this in my recent TED Talk, is it a crisis of meaning and connection? So finding connection, it can be meaningful, but also moving away from, we're really obsessed with self-help, right? And it's self-help, self, rather than it's actually in giving and putting ourselves out there for others that the meaning can come into our lives, right? And so we're living in a kind of society that is obsessed with optimization, but not in the sense of community, but in this intrinsic. You can have a conversation with someone and they can tell you about their trauma pattern, their attachment style, their this, and these are the more evolved ones, right? But they could tell you all these things. But when's the last time they really showed you their soul, or really were vulnerable, or said something that would allow a person to connect, right? So could we see this coming? There's been loads of research and around technology and the impact on our human, how we deal with things as humans. But it's also the nature of evolution, is that we swing one way and then we put guardrails in place later once we see the problems, which is why we're in this messy middle, because we don't quite have the guardrails for everything, and we're like, oh man, our kids are depressed and anxious, medicate them, that doesn't feel right, what do we do, right? So there's hope. There's so many grassroots organizations and projects and things happening that are tech free and that are aiming for this connection piece, which is why I think the pendulum is swinging to this other place. And the workplace is kind of a little bit delayed in that, I think, but it's going to come.
Does it mean that we are dealing with some sort of, I don't want to say harder, but different baseline at work specifically. So you touched on loneliness. You touched on, obviously, on this digital overload that we're all dealing with. Does this make the job of thinking of leaders inevitably a lot more difficult these days?
I have a fully remote team, and it's absolutely possible to enhance culture, well-being, psychological safety, and all of those pieces in a digital world, right? So I'm not here saying, oh, we should scrap technology and all sit around and be like we used to be. I'm not saying that at all. The job is harder, not just because of tech, but because of 5 generations being in the workplace, right? So there's lots of generational nuance, but also never before has a manager been held responsible for looking out for a colleague's well-being, you know? There's
Mhm.
been an implicit like, "Hey, we've got each other's back," but not like, "Hey, someone might come to me and tell me they're suicidal," or something might happen that I'm responsible for noticing and looking out for. So the remit of a leader and a manager from a people perspective has absolutely grown, but also it's the fear bit that is making people think that it's a bigger deal. So we're afraid that if we say the wrong thing, we'll get sued. We're afraid that if we say that, so it's actually just basics of human connection, noticing, knowing about your family, noticing if you're different than you were the last few weeks, just being able to openly say these things. It's not rocket science, right? But I think because we're in this fear state, because of technology, because of the amount of information that is out there, that's what's hindering leaders more than anything, I think.
Does this fear state make us lose touch with what we were once maybe better at, which is creating these meaningful connections?
The fear state absolutely affect I don't wanna be too like, "It was wonderful before and now it's hard now," right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Because there was a tribal community thing, but if you were a marginalized person and didn't follow the rules of that tribal community, you could be say you're gay in a small town and, and you could be ostracized from that group. So I'm not saying
Yeah.
it was all like religion was the answer, because lots of people are saying meaning was we had religion, we had but absolutely, religion has been used for control. So I'm not trying to go to the past in rose-tinted glasses.
Mhm.
However, there is a loss, especially in cities, and you can be in a household with 4 people, and both parents are on a device on the sofa in the evening while watching TV and texting their teenagers upstairs, right? And not having any actual human, we need there's studies from back in the day where kids had all their physical needs met, these babies in Romania, and they had food, they had shelter, they had these things, but they had no touch, and their physical health just shriveled away. And so this is what we're forgetting, is that we need eye contact, we need physical touch, we need the handshake, the pat on the back, to be seen, heard, and valued is the essence of what leaders need to be able to think about, and you can do that remotely. So a complex topic to squeeze into a short conversation.
And may I insist on this point? How do you do that remotely? So I understand and I can imagine that, like you say, it's not
Yes,
rocket science, but still, I believe that lots of people struggle with this, and you really hit the nail on the head when you talk about meaningful connections and people struggling with loneliness and a plethora of other topics. What are some? I don't want to call them simple steps because they're never simple, but
they
uh,
can be, sure.
there you go.
Practical,
What could
practical
be some
steps.
practical steps then that listeners could take away to create these connections in a hybrid environment?
So first of all, everyone is responsible for culture. We're often waiting for the manager, we're waiting for the policy or the system to happen. And if it doesn't, we're just like, this culture is like this, right? So I don't just I'd advocate for this top-down structured approach. I think you need the formal ways and the informal ways, which anyone can be responsible for. When you're remote, you do have to be more explicit. You can't just assume, you can't just guess. You have to get good at asking specific questions. So with my team, I might say, I might be totally wrong, but I haven't heard from you in a couple of days. And I just wonder, is that because you're like really getting your head down to work, or is there something going on? Is there anything I can do to support you? right? So I have to ask a specific question. That's very different than, how was your weekend? I checked in on my people. How are you? And that's what people think, is like, if I said, how are you? And they said they were fine, then we're good. No, you have to be more explicit. In the early stages of my company, we would have, and this is what teams, the conversation a team needs to have is about how we work, not just what we do. Everyone in my team knows that I'm a morning person, you know, and they know that I do my best flow work and focus time really early, and they might get an email at 6 a.m. And that there's no way in hell that that means they need to reply. There are people in my team that pick up kids from school. Like, we all know about each other's lives so that we know that we have each other's back. And of course, I have a small team. Global organizations, this is trickier, but you have micro teams within that setup. So we used to quite formally have a connection time at the beginning of our team meeting once a week. And it was rotated who organized it. So it wasn't just me, it was my assistant, it was project manager, like anyone in the team. And it could be anything from playing Pictionary for 10 minutes to asking someone what their favorite holiday destination was, to what's your biggest challenge at the moment, you know, either personally or professionally. So we could go really deep or we could go light, but we actually scheduled in time for connection. We don't have to do that anymore because it's more organic and everyone is taking responsibility for checking in and knowing what's going on in each other's lives. So, I mean, a few ideas. If I just touch on AI efficiencies. You know, a lot of talk is about meeting culture. And so the AI efficiencies are like, the agenda has to be clear, who needs to be in the room needs to be clear, the notes, the outcomes, blah, blah, blah. Very true, but not at the expense of the soul of the team. You know what I mean? So we're so hyper efficient, but nobody says anything else than, how are you, cracks a little joke, talks about the weather. I always talk about the weekend, the weather, and sports is our little connection. And then we don't go, that should be a bridge into something meaningful. And then finally, practice connection in your daily life because it's a muscle that you develop over time. And you lose, if you lose the habit, it gets harder. So if I go out for a coffee, I will make a point to talk to the person that made me coffee, or I will make a point to talk to a stranger. And that just keeps me used to it. So that when it comes to my team, it's okay, it's a bit tricky. Maybe they're going to, you know, you feel the emotional risk, but it doesn't feel like it anymore because I do it so often. And that's what people don't realize, is it's a skill that you have to master and practice. And if you lose it, you know, if you don't use it, you lose it, you know? And so those are a couple things.
This is very insightful. And let me ask you a final thing, still on this topic. Is it that hard? And I'm not expecting a yes or a no or whatever, but is it a lot more difficult to implement something like this, a culture where we foster deeper connections at the bigger company, at the corporate? Or is it simply, again, simply, so to speak, a matter of replicating what can be done in a smaller environment, but at a larger scale?
It's both. Right. So, yes, it's harder because if you have a system that is based on capitalism that has been running for years and years and years and is run by a very select few powerful people, right? It's really hard to shift that whole system, right? That might just have the mindset of fear, of profitability, of all sorts of other things, right? Greed or, you know, whatever. Obviously, business is made to make business, right? You've got to make money. So I'm not saying none of those things are evil or wrong. That's the part of, you know, we have to think about wellness from the perspective of high performance and getting to those targets and goals. And I would say I have worked with some organizations where it absolutely is possible because the people at the top, you have some influencers who get it and who want the culture to be that way. That helps. If you have influencers across different levels of the business, then you can be influencing change in that micro way that then spreads. And also you can have a strategic approach. There are some places that will not change. They are beyond hope and they are likely to affect your physical and mental health. I had to leave a cult because there was no way that I could change it from within. You know what I mean? And so there are absolutely some businesses where you've got to listen to your body. I remember leaving a job. I was hired, and 3 months later, I was like, I am out because the risk to my body and my mind is too great for me to stay here. Right. So you need to make that call and understand yourself in order to see, okay, is this a part where I am part of the problem and we could actually make a microcosm of psychological safety and all these things? Or is it just, either you have to work there because you need to make money and whatever, but you have to really consciously fortify yourself and recover outside in order to navigate it and let go of what's out of your control, right? Not everyone can leave a job. But I wouldn't say across the board that la-di-da, change is possible everywhere. No, sometimes you have to leave.
Petra, thank you so much for keeping it real. I hope we can do this soon again. And till next time.
Thanks so much.